Hello Year 11s and welcome to your presentation on Cockleshell, the third story in our study of Tim Winton's The Turning. Now, before I unpack the learning activities in this PowerPoint to support your understanding of Cockleshell, I would first advise that you reread the short story. And then once you've done that, watch the YouTube clip that is on the first slide of this PowerPoint. It features our main character, Breaky, watching Agnes while she fishes for cobbler. And take particular note of the setting. Now, in our study of big world and abbreviation, we know that setting is a key literary element in Tim Winton's work. So what I want you to do is when you're watching this video and then comparing to the text of the short story, take note of how Tim Winton is describing the setting. What words and phrases is he using? Also, try to make connections between the setting and the lives of our characters in this story. So your first activity for Cockleshell is a synopsis task. Firstly, you're going to plot the events of the narrative using only 10 dot points. So you need to be quite selective in what you are going to be summarizing. So be sure to include important events in the story, character relationships, turning points, and links to themes that we have been considering. Now, with character relationships, I would stress that you look beyond just the main character relationship. So look beyond Agnes and Breaky, for example. Consider the relationships with minor characters like Breaky's mum. When you're reading the text, you'll get this sense that the relationship is quite strained, it's tense, and that there's a lot of silence. And what we're going to be doing is that you can then unpack that relationship further and see how these relationship dynamics then reflect the actions of our characters in the story. And we see that Breaky doesn't like being at home, and so he goes to the beach to avoid the silence that he's met at home. Now, with turning points, Tim Winton loves a turning point. It is, in fact, the title of the story, The Turning. So a turning point is when we notice a focus in attention or direction in a story. So, for example, a turning point in Cockleshell would be when Breaky joins Agnes in her search for cobbler. At the beginning of the story, he sort of watches her from afar from the safety of the peppermint grove, but then he engages with her and then joins her, and that's a real turning point in their relationship. We're also making links to themes that we've been considering. So these are ideas that are not only reoccurring in this particular story, but also more broadly in The Turning. So this would include the desire to escape, growing up, love, class struggle. These are themes that we have seen both in big world abbreviation and that we will also see them in Cockleshell. Oh, and I should mention the power of nature. Now, once you have established your 10 dot points, you are then going to write a clear synopsis of the entire story, and this should only be 8 sentences long. So you're really needing to be concise and succinct in your writing. Final activity is that you need to consider the importance of the title Cockleshell. Now, often the title of a short story provides an important clue for the reader about what the short story is going to be about. It's also important to consider the message of what Tim Winton is trying to convey in this story. How does the title of the short story then fit in context with the book, The Turning, as a whole? So the next activities that you're going to be working through focus on motifs, symbols, and literary choices. The first part is that you are going to find textual examples of the following motifs and fill the table on the following slide. So similarly to what you've done in abbreviation, going on a evidence hunt, you are going to be doing the same thing here, except this time you're going to be focusing on motifs. So a motif is a recurrent image, idea, symbol that develops or explains a theme. Now, the reason why we're focusing on finding textual examples of motifs is that we're actually developing an important skill in our study of Tim Winton's work, being able to identify and analyze his use of literary devices to convey meaning in his texts. So this means that we need to look closely at the structure of Tim Winton's stories, how they convey author's voice, style, and messages. So the motifs that you're going to be looking out for, finding textual examples, quotes for, include feet and shoes, fire and fire imagery, yachts, peppermint grove, so nature, glass, the ocean, and fish. The second part of this activity is that you are going to be reflecting on how does Tim Winton use these motifs to enhance the reader's experience and understanding of the text. You may also want to consider literary choices of sentence length, descriptions, and perspective when writing about these motifs. So when we're looking at sentence lengths, we could be looking at the use of dialogue. We're looking at how these characters are talking to one another. When we're looking at the dialogue between Agnes and Breaky, their interactions are very short and abrupt, which suggests that they're a bit awkward talking to one another. We're also looking at descriptions of setting and of characters. Tim Winton uses particularly rich descriptive language to describe setting and also his characters. We also need to be considering the perspective of the story. So in our last story of Abbreviation, it was a third-person narrative. Similarly, in Cockleshell, it is also a third-person narrative, but it's very much narrowed to Breaky's perspective. So again, we're sort of experiencing the story through the eyes of Breaky and of a 15-year-old boy. Okay, so those are sort of the two activities that we're working on in this PowerPoint. So the first one, focusing on finding textual evidence, or evidence hunt, about motifs and symbols. So, for example, if we're looking at the motif of yachts in Cockleshell, and we know that motifs help develop and explain a theme, the motif of yachts develops the theme of class struggle. So an example of this is when Breaky comments about the gentrification of the town, describing the snooty little private schoolers from around the yacht club. This is found on page 117, 118, now occupying the beach and the town. So what you're going to be doing for the rest of these other motifs is that you are going to find quotes or examples of these motifs in the text and then filling out the table. Another example is the motif of glass, which is used to develop the theme of relationships between people. So an example of this is when Breaky hears the sound of breaking glass during the domestic violence incidents that happen at the Larwood household. Now, the second part of this activity is that we're focusing on Tim Winton's use of literary devices and reflecting how these motifs are used to enhance readers' experience and understanding of the text. So by the time you get to this stage in the PowerPoint, you will have a full table of textual evidence of your quotes that you can use to support your analysis. In the next slide is a table where you'll be writing a short paragraph analysing the effect of each device and motif. So, using the textual evidence that we've collected earlier, let's look at yachts. So, for example, the motif of yachts, So against that example, Breaky comments about the snooty little private schoolers from around the yacht club. So Winton uses yachts, which are commonly perceived as symbols of wealth, status and privilege, to highlight the class differences of those who live in Cockleshell. The presence of the yachts and those who own them sharply contrast with the socio-economic status and lived experiences of the people who live in Cockleshell. Remember that the town has been severely and negatively impacted by the closure of the meatworks and the whaling station. So the motif of yachts acts as a mean to convey Winton's message about class struggles in society. Another example, again using the evidence that we used in the earlier activity, is about the motif of glass. So this is when Breaky hears the sound of breaking glass during the domestic violence incident in the Larwood household. So Winton uses glass to illustrate the fragility of relationships between people. The breaking of the glass reflects the destruction of ties within the Larwood family and reinforces Agnes's belonging to a broken home. We could even go as far as looking at Breaky's name, which actually sounds like breaking. And we know that Breaky also comes from a broken home, in that his father left him and his mother several years ago, and that his mother hasn't been able to recover from that incident. So, first part of this activity, you are filling out that table, finding your textual evidence, and then you are reflecting on what those motifs are trying to convey. What is Tim Winton's message in using motifs of yachts, of imagery of the Peppermint Grove? Now, following that activity, you're going to be responding analytically to the following prompt. People are changed by events, love, and pain in their life. How does the story present families and relationships as fragile? So here you're going to be writing a paragraph responding to that prompt, using the textual evidence that you've collected and also your reflection on how Tim Winton is using these devices to convey meaning. So you're really kind of synthesizing that work that you've done to then be able to write an analytical response. Now, lastly, is that you're going to be responding creatively to Cockleshell. So there's lots of options for you to respond creatively. So here, choose one or more ways to respond creatively to Cockleshell. Remember to consider the ways you can include the literary devices you've been looking for. So first example here is that you can look at Agnes's perspective of Breaky watching her at the start of the story, the cobbler expeditions with Breaky. So in this instance, we are having a change in perspective. Another activity you can do is write the story of Breaky's old man leaving them high and dry for someone else. Now this is a fill in the gap. We don't ever really hear much from Breaky's old man, and nor do we hear the reasons why he left the family. So this would be a fill in the gap activity or creative response. Alternatively, write the story from the Union battle and the closure of the meatworks in the town. To fill in the gap, write a newspaper article about Brad Benson's dad, the banker, jumping into the big hole. So this is you writing in a completely new text type. We haven't done any newspaper articles, but this is an opportunity to write creatively, but using a different text type. Now, last couple of activities before we wrap up, that you can write up Breaky's childhood memory of the kids in the canoe and Agnes catching the mullets. Write the story of how Eric Larwood stopped drinking, including the prayer groups, his wife's efforts, and why Margaret left. Letters between Agnes and her sister Margaret, who moved to the city. What does Agnes want to tell her about her life in Cockleshell and Angeles? And what does Margaret have to say about their life in the city? You could write a newspaper article about the Larwood house fire, the death of Mr. Larwood. And where did the